I'm Allie Jackson Jolly. I'm here with Prentiss Haney, who is the co-executive director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. Welcome.
Thank you, Ali. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and so one of on the heels of the last election, one of the big stories to come out has been some of the wins around abortion rights and also around legalizing marijuana. And so specifically Ohio was one of the states that voters came out and said we want our rights to choose abortion, and we want to have marijuana legalized. The work that you do, I know, because we were talking about this, is around cluster voting in order to highlight and increase the impact of the Black vote. And so I was hoping that you could just explain to me, what is cluster voting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, a couple years ago, I'm in my organization, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. We're the largest community organization in the state of Ohio that works with people of faith, childcare workers, formerly incarcerated persons, K through 12 parents, and students and young people, most of which are African American voters and members of Ohio. And we've been doing work for a number of years about how we engage in democracy, how we engage in issues that matter most to that community. And what we knew through our organizing work as a grassroots group is that, Black folks are not a monolith, but oftentimes when we engage in electoral politics or we are asked to engage in electoral politics, we're all kind of slotted in one category, like, oh, the Black vote's going to do this thing. You're going to give one sort of treatment to them. And we knew intrinsically that was not true about how we operate as a community, but we wanted to do some research to see if the way that we organize and the way that we know Black communities are organized, if there's a better way to actually do outreach. And so that's what started us with this cluster analysis. And part of what's been so exciting about it is that the cluster analysis is not about how to better do messaging for Black voters. It's actually about understanding the values and ideology of different segments of Black voters in a particular area and what creates belonging and sameness amongst those folks so that organizations like us can build programs that meet their needs and then be able to help move them out. So this research is the first of its kind in the nation. We did a preliminary study nationally, and then we did Ohio specifically to understand the diverse values within the Black electorate.
Yeah, so I know that I just by hearing you talk about that, I can tell that you are a data person, you're a data scientist, but assume that all of our readers aren't. Specifically, when you talk about cluster voting, can you explain what it is that you're looking at and how you're creating these clusters? And by understanding how to mobilize different sub communities within the Black community.
Absolutely. So we used a couple different characteristics to build these clusters. We asked, baseline demographic questions like age, party identification, geography, economic status, socioeconomic status, some of those baseline, and, oftentimes most surveys stop there. But part of what we did after that was actually get clear about some of the questions that get towards ideology. So asking questions around their perception of their own political power. Do they have trust in governmental systems? What do they feel like is most at stake? Do they identify more as being Black or being as an American? Do they see the wealthy and powerful as the folks who have power in our country? Or do we see Black people coming together as change agents as the most powerful vehicle? And so these sort of questions helped us understand a number of different things: Black identity, Black political efficacy, and from understanding like Black political efficacy and our Black identity, along with our demographic questions, we were able to create what we call these personas. And there's 4 personas in Ohio within the Black electorate. And so I'll say a little bit about them. So the 4 personas that showed up is 1, legacy civil rights. So this group is about a quarter of Ohioans, and these folks tend to have higher resources. They identify strong Democrats. They lean more progressive than moderate. But these folks are the folks you think about, like your grandmothers, your folks who go to church, and they're like, it doesn't matter what the barrier is, what the issue is, they're going to go out and vote, and they're going to make sure that their voices are heard.
The people who are tisking at us all,
yes.
when we say this is a really boring election year, I think I'm going to skip. Those are the legacy voters, or the folks that are tisking at us and saying, hey, listen, we fought hard for these rights to have a voice. You get out there and you do it. Okay, so who's
like literally one of the participants said, my ancestors sacrificed so too much for me not to vote. So that is their whole energy. So that's like, when we think about the Black voter, honestly, we think about that voter primarily in the political industry as the voter we're trying to get. But that's only one part of the electorate. The second one I want to talk about, I'm very excited about this one, is the next gen optimist. So this one mirrors a lot of the sort of personality traits of the legacy civil rights. But some of the main differences is that they identify, they see themselves as being Black as more important than any other identity. Like they care about their Blackness as like the primary driving sense of who they are. These folks tend to be younger voters, college students. Now they don't identify as strong Democrats, but they do have progressive values on issues that matter. And they also have a very strong sense of their connection to God and to faith. And so seeing that in that cluster has been really important. But the one thing that's been really, really interesting is that this cluster of younger voters, they actually really care a lot about the election. They care about voting. And then they actually believe that they're voting in every election. And then when we talked to them in focus groups, it was like, did you know there was a primary or August special election? They said no. And then it was like, oh my God, nobody explained this to me. If I would have known there was an election, I would have voted. And so these folks really want the information because they really care about the issues in their communities and they want to participate. One of their biggest issues is like ending racial violence. That's the kind of things that they want to see happen in their community. And then I want to talk about the third one and then the last one. The third one is my favorite group. I'm like obsessed with this particular crew because I think that if we can engage this crew, we change American politics. So this third cluster is the rightfully cynical persona. So these folks are more working class voters. They're also younger. They're like, between that sort of 25 to 40 age. They're actually the most registered voters in Ohio. Like most of these people are registered to vote. However, they're not participating, but they're not participating for a very specific reason. They don't trust Democrats. They don't trust Republicans. They feel like there's no politician that's showing up for their community. There was this quote where they said, my hood didn't get any better under Obama. It didn't get any worse under Trump. So what the president got to do with me? And so that is the sort of energy they're bringing, is that American politics is not delivering anything substantial for them. And their top issue is economic security. And so, this is actually the second largest group of Black voters in Ohio. And if we have a whole crew of those folks there that feel like no one is there for them, then they're actually not mobilization targets, they're persuasion targets, because you have to persuade them to swing from not participating to participating because they believe that their non-participation is their political action.
Wait, now hold on for a second before you get to the fourth group, because you used two terms. I want to make sure that I understand them. One is mobilization target and one is persuasion targets. So you're saying that for mobilization targets, they want to vote, you're just helping them get out there, or can you
Yes.
in the clearest terms possible help me understand the difference between those two targets?
Yeah. So in traditional campaigning in politics, you hear a lot about mobilization and persuasion. So most of the times when a campaign is engaging Black people, they say, oh, we just need to mobilize them. We just need to make sure that they know there's an election, get them information about the election, then they will show up and they will vote at, the way that they're going to vote. And that means, and honestly, mobilization is probably the least amount of money that's spent in a campaign, because it's like, oh, they're going to do what we want them to do. We just got to get them to the polls. And then on the flip side is persuasion. Persuasion is all about understanding that a voter is at a place that's not where you want them to be. So they're having conversations, hard conversations, kitchen table conversations about issues to move them to where you want them to be, and for them to make a decision to come and vote in your favor. And so most of American politics is about persuasion. It's about the white working class voter or the suburban woman. They're trying to go get this voter that they want to persuade to show up. So the reason why this is important between mobilization and persuasion is that because most of our politics see Black voters as a monolith, they miss this persona, the rightfully cynical. But they are not mobilization targets. These are persuasion targets. They are making a conscious choice not to engage. They need someone to come talk to them and show that there's a reason to show up and to be in this election, not to tell them where to vote, how to vote. They want to know that who's on the ballot and the issues actually matter enough for them to show up. That's
Oh, okay.
their persuasion.
Interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, and then tell me, because that was 3 segments. What is this 4th target? I want to know who the 4th folks are that that are either voting or aren't voting right now.
This is an interesting target too. So the last target, the last cluster is race neutral conservatives. So this persona is about 15% of the Black electorate in Ohio. They have more, they lean more towards a millennial identity. They are more Republican in their stance. They might identify as that. They have slightly higher incomes. But what's so interesting about this particular one is that they might lean and be interested in Trump, but when we look at their voter turnout, they actually have the lowest voter turnout of all the clusters.
And
So,
why, why is that? Does that have to do with belonging, or what is
yes,
the reason for that?
bingo, you got it. So this cluster and all the clusters have an issue with their perception of their own political power. So let me talk about that for a second, then I'm going to say a thing about this. Across all 4 clusters in Ohio, this is the actual biggest issue. The perception of Black political power is 20 points lower in Ohio across all 4 clusters than the national average from when we did our preliminary research.
The national average of Black voters.
Of Black voters.
Okay.
Yeah, of Black voters.
So the Ohio voters feel less empowered in their ability to vote and change policy to be heard. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So that means if someone, so like there's a correlation between your perception of your power and then the actions you do to be powerful. People who feel powerless don't act powerfully. They act powerless if they believe they're powerless. So this particular cluster, they feel the most powerless in the state, so they don't act on it. So even if they have more conservative values, they don't feel like their vote matters anyway. And so they're not participating either.
That's interesting. I wonder, so those last 2 targets that you talked about, which were the
rightfully cynical,
and then the conservative
conservatives, yep.
Okay. So is it accurate to say that, at least in terms of their sense of belonging and being empowered, they have the most overlap? They are they share this view that there's not a spot for them, and so they're a little bit checked out of the process?
Yeah, so how I would describe it is that those 2 personas feel the most isolated in American politics. They feel like there's no place for them, there's no voice for them. And they also become the targets of a lot of misinformation programs. That's where we see, especially targeting Black men, they're targeting Black men who are in this rightfully cynical category or this race neutral conservative category. What's so interesting is that there might be a lot of conversations that are similar in the rightfully cynical category, in the race neutral category, but they don't have the same politics. They actually have different politics. The race neutral ones are actual conservatives. The rightfully cynical crew are not conservative folks. They just don't believe that politics can deliver what they need for their families and for themselves. So that's where our organization comes in. That's what we do. What we focus on is 3 out of the 4. We have vehicles for 3 out of the 4 of these personas to help actually create belonging, because the other part of the research is that while Black Ohioans believe that their perception of the political power is low, they also believe that if Black people came together and were in something powerful, something they belong to, that they could change the policies in the state. So what that means is that we have to have vehicles of agency and belonging for each of the personas, each of the clusters, if we want to change the outcomes of these elections. But not even just these elections, want to change the outcomes of democratic practice. Because the thing about democracy is democracy doesn't begin and end on election day. It's a 365-day endeavor. And that if you're not a part of a democratic, like small d democratic vehicle where you can see your values reflected, but people who look like you get to have hard conversations, you get to participate as a civic leader in your community, then there's no way to imagine that on election day you're going to decide to cast a ballot if you haven't done that sort of civic engagement prior to it. So what we do is that we this year we did 2 pilot programs for 2 of these clusters. To help actually see, like, can we move the needle on this? So we did a voter guide program with our students for the Next Gen Optimists. So we, look at that. We passed out and had conversations with 35,000 students about what was on the ballot, how do you access the ballot, how do you cast your ballot, because many students, a lot of them don't have state IDs. In Ohio, unfortunately, we have one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country where students can't use their student IDs. So we were helping students get government IDs so they can cast their ballot. And so that was a program that we designed specifically for the Next Gen Optimist cluster because that's the thing they need to engage. And then for our Rightfully Cynical program, we did a program in Cleveland with our formerly incarcerated base. So these are men who have served 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, who've come home. They've decided to take a responsibility as a civic leader in their neighborhood, and they knock the doors of Black voters in the neighborhood, some of them who are also formerly incarcerated, and talk to them about what it meant for them to be a civic leader in the organization, why they care about the power that they need in their community, and how if with their vote and then the person they're talking to, if they could work together to vote collectively, they could have economic power in Cleveland. And we did that all throughout the electoral season. And we saw one of the statistics that was super interesting is that during early vote, there was a 9% uptick of the people we talked to that went out and vote. And that 9% of folks, they didn't vote in 22. So they were showing up because they were having conversations with people like them, other rightfully cynical voters, and actually having a conversation about how their actions collectively could change the outcome. So
Oh,
those are
interesting. So that helped me understand. My next question was gonna be to you. So now understanding you're doing the work, you're helping us understand that the Black voter, at least in Ohio, is not a monolith, and in fact may not even be voting for the same initiatives or for the same candidates. But what you're saying is when you say that they feel more empowered if they understand as a voice, they can move the needle within those targets. So it's not that they have this view, okay, all the Black people of Ohio, let's get together. It's sort of giving them a sub community to use their voice and become an agent of change, or at least a voter of change, right?
Yes, but really an agent of change. Because the point is, if you feel isolated, you feel ostracized, you feel like your issues are only yours, the best person to talk to you, to move you into action, is the person who's also going through that. The person from that same background who can empathize with where you are. And that's the reason why these clusters matter so much, because they're not just talking to any Black voter, they're talking to a Black voter that's like them, who understands why they feel the way they are. And then they're saying that we're not waiting on a politician to deliver something for us. We're going to take our own power back. And that's across each cluster. And to me, and I mean, just step away from the data for a second, the thing that matters about this more than anything is that American politics has gotten so far away from building an electorate and building a community of people who are civically engaged 365. We cannot have a thriving democracy when Black voters feel like they are at the bottom of the barrel, and that actually the people don't want them to participate. They want a transactional experience of them. Democracy only works when people have agency, when people actually believe that their actions make a real difference. And so many Black voters in Ohio and across the nation have been stripped of that agency, and have been treated as transactional numbers that they know he's like, the gig is up. I'm not going to show up that way. But
So let me ask you, can I ask you to get back to what happened in Ohio around abortion rights and also around marijuana legalization? Can you talk to me about what what you saw in those clusters? Was it what were did part of this win happen because more Black voters came out to vote for those issues, or what did you see? I'm really interested to
yes,
know what you saw.
that's what I was going to say, is that like part of what we saw on election night with the exit polls is that overwhelmingly Black voters supported abortion rights and legalization of marijuana. Over 80%. I mean, I just saw an exit poll today where 87% of Black men supported abortion rights in Ohio. And
That's fascinating, because that was
exactly,
going to be my question. Was it really the Black community or was it Black women? That's fascinating to me that it was 80% of all.
87%.
Okay,
But
wow.
let me say this. This goes back to these clusters. A lot of those Black men are oftentimes not being organized in the cluster of people who are similar to them. We did a specific rightfully cynical program that many of which, not all of them, but many of which of them are Black men, and talked about the issues that matter most to them. We talked about agency. For them, it was agency on the ballot, freedom, and Black men want agency and freedom. And so it's not a surprise that we saw an uptick in the voter turnout in our programs. And we know that was happening across the state because we registered over 22,000 voters. 90% of them were African American. We knocked over 200,000 doors. Those were African American voters. That kind of program made that impact where we saw on election night that overwhelmingly African Americans made this happen. That is a direct correlation to the cluster analysis we were doing to build segmented programs for each part of that electorate so that they didn't hear some blanketed message about what Black people should be doing. They heard targeted engagement, community organizing conversations about what matters most to them from people who look like them and care about the issues the way they do.
So I have a question. If I were, let's say, the head of the Democratic Party, I would say, this is fascinating. So let's continue to do this. Let's continue to put issues on the ballot that will get folks out to vote and get our candidate through. But is there necessarily a correlation between people getting your Black voters coming out to pull the lever for an issue? Will that convert to them pulling the same lever for the candidate? What do you think about that?
This is what I'll say is that you have to have motivational issues on the ballot to inspire people to take action. But the issue itself is not going to get someone to vote. What gets people to vote is actual community organizing and people having conversations about how that issue can change something for them. So then that takes that anger into hope and that hope into action. Now they're at the ballot box. When someone is sitting in that ballot box while they're voting on the issues that they have agency to change, they're going to be looking at the candidates who also make the same promises about the issues that they care about too. So what I would say is that candidates need to actually align around the issues that matter most to each of the clusters in the Black electorate. They need to make sure they're talking about democracy. They need to be talking about agency and freedom. They need to be talking about ending racial violence. They need to be talking about like economic justice issues, domestic economic justice issues. I do think that most of the clusters, when they show up in the ballot box, will also vote for candidates who align with the issues they voted on. But like the rightfully cynical group, that's not a given because remember, they're not mobilization, they're persuasion. So yes, they will show up for those issues, but those candidates have to also be working to persuade them that they are the best candidate for the issues around economic security that they want to see passed. So there's no shortcut. Just because they showed up doesn't mean they're going to show up for the rest of this. But if you do the work to talk about the issues and be in community with them, and then we do our work to get motivational issues on the ballot and then create vehicles of belonging, that together is actually what creates the conditions in 24 where Black people actually are the margin of victory on every race.
And so who do you think could be the big winners here? beyond the Black community. Of course, if the Black community is empowered and engaged and has, a greater sense of their own power to shift, to make change, of course, they're the winners. But I'm actually talking about in terms of candidates or parties. Do you see, is there opportunity for, either the two big parties out there, the Democrats and the Republicans? Do you think that maybe a third party is the big winner? Who do you think,
Mhm.
as you do this work and more people in the policy world realize how powerful this is, particularly around Black and frankly, probably all traditionally marginalized communities? Um, who could be the big winner from understanding this?
Well, this is how I think about it. I mean, honestly, I think the big winner is going to be American democracy if we do our jobs. And the reason why I say that is that there's one party right now in American politics that is trying to undermine, destroy, and manipulate American democracy. So the GOP in the states, at like Ohio, they have purged 2.5 million voters in the last decade. They have gerrymandered maps where Black voters have been diluted, cracked apart. Their votes are not as powerful as white votes because of how they've cheated and rigged the rules, and they have the most strict voter ID laws in the country. And so one party feels like the only way that they can win is by lying and cheating and undermining and eroding American democracy. And then there's another party that is using American democracy almost like it is it is a way that they can achieve their ends by doing voter efficiency, trying to spend the least amount of money to reach the cheapest voter. And both strategies will have both parties losing in different ways. What I do think about what the Democrats can do is that they can double back down that democracy is about inclusion of all of us and actually reach out to the voters who are most likely to be excluded from democracy. Black voters, Latino voters, all marginalized people. And you actually talk about what democracy delivers for folks, and you actually talk about the issues you're going to deliver by representing them, and you do it, that's the thing that can happen on election night. But I don't think that we will have a country that works for all of us if we don't have a democracy that works for all of us. And if any party or candidate is not actually using democracy as a vehicle for more Black people to participate, because it wasn't just that long ago, just 60 years ago, most of us were not fully enfranchised in this nation. We will not have a country that can deliver on all the promises that it says it's supposed to deliver on.
Yeah, and one stat that I think about often, which is that by the year 2045, if the population continues to do what it's doing right now in the US, there will be more melanated people than non-melanated, right? And
Yes.
um, so it is really interesting to think about, a democratic system that is including all Americans, knowing that pretty soon the majority of Americans won't be white, right? So
And
that's
that's the reason why we're in the crisis we're in now, is because America is changing, which means democracy has to change to meet the needs of today. But the fight we're up against, it's like we're trying to roll back the clock and the time and basically build a democracy that's built on a caste system. And we know that a democracy built on a caste system is no democracy at all. And if we can't expand it and create real vehicles of belonging for Black folks and then the majority of people of color who will be in this country by 2045, we will not have a democracy that can work for all of us.
yeah. Well, we're unfortunately I could do this for I feel like another hour with you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you. Thanks for coming, explaining to us what's going on in Ohio, and I think even more importantly, what is the future of cluster voting and creating a path for Black Americans to feel like they're part of the system.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.